I met David Jones on the first day of 4th grade. My name's Henry Johnson and Miss Jenkins assigned our seats alphabetically, so he sat behind me in the middle row. I was 10 and naturally suspicious of anything or anyone new, and since David was the new kid in school sitting right behind me, I was very suspicious. I wasn't the big kid in the class. In fact, I was a bit small for my age and only caught up with the other kids when my growth spurt hit a few years later. David was a bit bigger than me, and that added to my mistrust. We got off to a bad start that first day of 4th grade when I felt a tap on my back. I turned around and the new kid asked me if he could borrow a pencil. What kind of kid comes to school without a pencil? I searched my desk for a spare, and that's when Miss Jenkins stopped the class to ask me why I wasn't paying attention. Well, give him a pencil and stop goofing off. Chewed out on the first day. The new kid was not off to a good start as far as I was concerned. Over the next few days we talked a bit, mostly in a group with some of the other better students, and I was starting to think that the new kid might be okay. All the while, Billy Barron was re-establishing his importance on the playground. Billy Barron, or Big Billy as he liked to be called, was the class bully. There were even some 5th graders he bullied when he got the chance. Let's just say he was a first-class jerk, and he was confident in his physical superiority. Big Billy didn't waste a lot of time, and on the 4th day of the first week of school he cornered me on the playground when the teachers were distracted. Billy was intent on reminding me of my place in the pecking order when all of a sudden David flew in, seemingly from nowhere, body-checked Big Billy on his shoulders and head, knocking Billy off his feet and driving him to the ground. Not waiting for Billy to regain his wits, David sat on his chest and threw 4 solid roundhouse blows to Big Billy's face and then jumped to his feet and stepped back. We both expected that our lives were over at that point, but Billy surprised us and cried like a baby. There must have been a commotion because 2 teachers were there before anyone could get away. We got detention for a week, but it was going to take more than that to wipe the smiles off my and David's faces. Sitting outside the principal's office, I thanked him for coming to my rescue. "What are friends for?" was all he said. From that day on, David and I were true friends. By Christmas we were best friends, and by summer we were like brothers. I would tutor David in his classes, and he would teach me to defend myself. We got to work bridging one another's shortcomings. Miss Jenkins must have been sharper than I thought, because by Thanksgiving she had recognized the signs of dyslexia in David. With the support of his parents and a good therapist, he began to excel in school as I began to stand up to the bullies. You want to hear something I would never have expected? By summer, Billy was friends with both David and me. It turned out that Billy was also dyslexic, although his was worse than David's, and his inability to learn was the source of his bullying. Once he got the help he needed, he became a new man, well, a new boy, anyway. Under that mantle of anger and frustration there was a really decent guy. More than once he saved us from the older kids, and I began to think that half the world must be dyslexic. As we grew older and started high school, Big Billy, as he was still known, started playing football in the fall and baseball in the spring, and he quickly became the big man in high school. Despite that, he never lost his genuine good nature and warm heart. He joined up when we graduated and was killed in Iraq a year later. He was as much loved and respected by his fellow soldiers as he was by us, and the saddest day in my life was the day we laid our friend William Barron to rest. Make that the second saddest day. The saddest day came 7 years later. Plus. David and I went to separate colleges, but we stayed in touch. We got together over holidays and during the summers, and each time it was like no time had passed. We instantly picked up where we left off, finishing the stories we started before returning to school, chasing the girls, and generally trying to have a good time while not getting into too much trouble. In my junior year I met Ariel and fell hopelessly in love. She was warm and funny, bright and mischievous, and she kept me on my toes. It's true, she made me work for it. She flirted and encouraged me in every way a woman can, but she took it slow, and I decided I would wait forever if that was what it took. It didn't. It took 6 months, and then she was in my bed never to leave, or so I thought. Summer came and my parents were anxious to meet her, and quietly passed judgment on this young woman who had captured my heart, so she spent 2 weeks staying with us as I stayed with her family as well. By the end of summer, both sets of parents decided they approved. We each got a gentle lecture about waiting until marriage, but I think they all knew that wasn't happening. Ariel got a quiet reminder from her mother to be smart, take precautions, and not get pregnant until she was married. My father gave me much the same lecture and said, if you have to, for God's sake don't be stupid and wear a condom. I nodded and smiled. Ariel was already on the pill. Ariel met David while she visited me that summer and they quickly became surprisingly close. I would leave them alone for a few minutes for whatever reason and return to find them laughing together. She would give him a nudge with her shoulder, and he would give her a hug. It was as if they had known each other as long as David and I had known one another, and I confess I had my first pangs of jealousy. However, I told myself that I was being foolish, that these were the two people closest to me in all the world, and if I couldn't trust them then I couldn't trust anyone. In the fall we went back to school for our senior year. Ariel would, from time to time, ask about David and how he was doing. I told myself that was normal since they had become friends, but I confessed that it sometimes wore on my mind. It was never much, and she never would go on about him, but I sometimes felt like boundaries were being crossed. I told myself I needed to grow up and should set aside any concerns I had about them, and for the most part one did exactly that. Graduation came and I popped the question. Ariel accepted and all the world seemed right. We both got jobs in Hartford, Connecticut, found an apartment, and moved in together. Now years before, when attending a wedding of my cousin, I told my parents, I'm never going to do all this. I'll find a girl who wants a simple wedding and then a party and it's done. When my parents stopped laughing, my father said, when you find the right girl, if you find the right girl, you will do what she wants, smile, and act like you like it. The smile on my mother's face told me he was right, and I retained the lesson. When the time came, I helped Ariel find a hall, hire a florist, choose the cake, select the menu, and address the invitations. I wore the tux she approved of, practiced my vows, and I did as I was told. Snicker at me all you want, you guys did the same thing, and you know it. David flew into town to be my best man. The wedding went off without a hitch and I settled into a happily married life with my love. 6 months went by and David moved to Hartford. Life was getting better every day. I had long gotten over those pangs of jealousy I once felt and trusted each of them completely. I would later come to wonder how my trust had been misplaced. We all three had good jobs and were doing well. Life was good. We each moved out of our entry-level positions and started taking on real responsibility. David had an apartment across town from us, but Hartford is a small town and we got together regularly. In fact, it wasn't unusual for me to come home and find Ariel and David sitting at the kitchen table, each with a beer, laughing over some shared joke. It was a Friday evening and I walked through the door. Look at him, dragging his sorry ass home like some old man. Ariel was giggling at this. What's the matter, babe, have a hard day? I dropped my case on the sofa. There are some days when it seems all I do is fill out forms, write reports, and get not one damn thing of any importance done. David sat up straight and said, not important? What kind of paper-pushing bureaucrat are you? Don't you know that the paperwork is all that matters? If the papers are in order, then everything has to be right. That's what passes for engineering humor. Yeah, right. The paperwork was all in order, but NASA still drove a spacecraft into Mars. You have to admit, it made a big hole. David was laughing now, and Ariel was smiling. By then I'd found a beer and raised it in a toast. Never do anything in a small way. To paperwork, and we each took a drink. That night we grilled some burgers, baked some potatoes, and Ariel made a salad. David slept over and we all went out to breakfast the next morning. In other words, it was the start of a fairly typical weekend. David claimed to have a date Saturday night and a few errands to run first, so we didn't see him the rest of the weekend. That was fine with me since I wanted some private time with the lady of the house, although it was really just an apartment. Like I said, life was good. In fact, it was so good that I didn't notice when our life together started to change. It was probably a year and a half into our marriage when Ariel started working late more often. She also started dressing better for work. It wasn't sudden and it wasn't excessive, so when I finally noticed the pattern, I wrote it off as being no more than a motivated young woman taking on her professiona. L. Responsibilities. We were making more money by that time and I understood that she wanted to dress better. We were still getting together with David regularly and many times he was still waiting for me when I got home on Friday evenings. The problem was that increasingly he was waiting alone. The ball and chain working late again? Apparently. She's been doing that a lot lately. Yeah, she's been taking on a lot of responsibility and working longer hours. David nodded and mumbled, "Got to admire that, I suppose." I shirked. "Yeah, I suppose. We've been talking about starting our family soon, but she wants to get a little higher in the company first. She thinks it will make it easier to return to work when she's ready." Yeah. I suppose that's true. David was turning away as he said it. We got a couple of beers and settled into chairs in the living room. We were both unusually quiet for a long time. "Everything else good at home?" David tried to make it sound like a casual question, but he failed. "Yeah. She's tired a lot when she gets home, but I'm trying to take some of the load off her by doing more of the laundry and stuff." I paused for a moment wondering if I wanted to admit this to my best friend. I'm starting to worry about her a little. She's usually too tired for, and I'm thinking maybe she needs an iron supplement or something. David seemed to be lost in thought for a moment and then while looking at the ground he quietly said, "Working late, tired all the time, not feeling amorous." He took a deep breath. "Yeah, maybe she needs an iron supplement." I looked at my friend, my brother, and shook my head. She wouldn't. Not Ariel. She would never do that. You're right. I'm just being stupid. Not Ariel. We let it rest for a few minutes and then looking at my friend I said, "I've got some steaks in the fridge." "Whoa, big spender. What's the occasion?" "Livin' large, my friend, livin' large." It was false bravado, but we both needed to change the subject. David and I waited for a time, broke out some nibbles and drank a second beer, and then got on with grilling the steaks once Ariel arrived home an hour later. From that point on, it was a typical, happy Friday night and I let our earlier discussion fall into the furthest recesses of my mind. Our lives continued on in this way for about 6 months when Ariel came to me one evening. "Henry, Mom's not doing all that well. She's been complaining about being lonely and since Dad died, she seems to be not really living." "You know what I mean?" "Yeah, babe, I do. Why don't we bring her down here to stay with us for a time?" "Actually, I was thinking about going up there for a weekend. Maybe all she needs is some mother-daughter time." Now I should explain to you that both David and I grew up in southern Rhode Island close to the Connecticut border, but Ariel grew up outside Burlington, Vermont. She was a country girl at heart and every so often she felt the need to get away from the crowds and the traffic to stand in the middle of a field far away from people. At least, she used to be that way. So, I figured she needed to get away for a few days. "When do you think you'll be going?" "I was thinking this weekend. I'll take off Friday and drive up, then come back Sunday evening and I'll spend all week making it up to you." "I could always come with you." "Babe, if you do Mom will just spend the whole time fussing over you. You're like the son she never had." She was smiling. "Other than your brother, George, you mean?" "Well, George has always been such a disappointment to Mom and..." She couldn't hold it together and started to giggle. "Okay, babe. You win. You go see your mom and have a good time. I love you, old man." She had started calling me that lately. I guess it was a term of endearment, but I confess it didn't sit well with me. After that, she would go to visit her mother about every 4 weeks, give or take, stay for a long weekend, and come home refreshed and happy. It seemed to be good for her and I was sure it was good for her mother, so I tried not to complain. That's what a husband does, right? He tries to keep the women in his life happy. At least, that's what I was taught. Plus. Ariel had been making her monthly trips to visit her mother for about 8 months, but she was no longer working late the way she had been. She also wasn't tired anymore. I figured visiting her mother from time to time was good for them both and I chalked that up to a net plus for us all. Our sex life improved, too, so I wasn't complaining. When things are going well, you naturally think they will continue that way, but change can come abruptly and without warning. I was driving home on a Wednesday night with the rain coming down hard, and I was thinking about things other than driving, when I ran a red light and got hit hard in front of the driver's door. I'd heard of people dying when they get T-boned, so once I gathered my wits about me and they told me what had happened, I was feeling lucky. I had a broken leg and bruises down my left side, not to mention a mild concussion, but I was alive. Later I realized that if I'd been hit on my door 6 feet further back, driving at 45 miles per hour, that's just a tenth of a second later, I'd have been dead. That's how the engineering mind works. The difference between life and death was a tenth of a second. EMS arrived, put me on a stretcher, and took me to the hospital. They checked me out, patched me up, put a cast on my leg, and in the morning, they sent me home. Ariel fussed over me for a week, and I can't say that I minded that in the slightest. David started coming over nightly to see how I was doing and what needed to be done. Both soon decided that I was fine, mobile enough to take care of myself, and life returned to normal. I returned to work the middle of the next week, and either Ariel or David would drive me to work and home again while my friends at work fussed over me some more. Crutches will do that, and I confess that I milked it for all it was worth. The discomfort subsided and the cast and crutches became little more than an inconvenience. I could go up and down stairs, across the parking lot, and even down the road a block or two, but it was a lot of effort, so I tended to eat lunch in the building. I got around, but I wasn't fast. Pretty soon, Ariel stopped fussing over me, and I began to count the days until the cast came off. For weeks after the accident, she sat down next to me and said, "Henry, it's been a while since I visited my mother. Would you mind terribly if I drove up there this weekend? I'll make it a short weekend, drive up Saturday morning and be home Sunday night." I confess I wasn't crazy about the idea, but I was getting around well enough. I still wasn't driving, so I called David and asked if he would be available if I needed to get out. Was he available? Friday night he showed up at my door with a bag full of groceries, mostly steaks and beer with a couple bags of nachos, and moved into the guest room for the weekend. Far be it for me to complain, we cracked open 2 cold ones while my wife packed her bag for the trip. Ariel going to visit her mother again this weekend? Yeah. It's been a long time. I'm doing pretty good and her mother needs her. I'm sure. I looked at my friend, but I said nothing. In the morning, Ariel kissed me goodbye and in very good spirits she walked out the door and drove off for Vermont. David seemed to stare at the doorway after she had passed through and gone until I finally said, "What's bugging you?" "Me? Nothing. You know me. I'm Mr. Get Along. I've got no worries, nothing to see here. Let's go to breakfast, Mr. Get Along. I'm hungry." If you've never had your leg in a cast, you don't know what it takes to get into a car with one leg perfectly straight and unbendable. You have a choice. You can sit sideways in the back seat, or you can do the slip and slide in the front. The slip and slide works like this. You put the seat all the way back and the seat back flat. With a plastic trash bag on the seat, you sit on the bag and slide your way onto the seat back until you are situated far enough back that you can swing your leg into the car. Then you slide forward until you're situated properly on the seat and raise the seat back to its normal position. When you get to your destination, you do it all in reverse so you can get out. Going out for breakfast was a big production, so I made it all worthwhile and ordered the right side of the menu. Well, not really. I got eggs Benedict, home fries, coffee, and orange juice with several slices of bacon on the side. I thought seriously about getting a grilled blueberry muffin, but I was too embarrassed to order it when the waitress came back. It was a Saturday, and my bum leg gave me every excuse to avoid doing any chores, so David and I made a day of it. We went to the outdoors store and checked out the high-end fly rods, then we bought a half-dozen flies. We dream big but live on a budget. Then we went to the range and rented a pair of guns for an hour. Neither of us owns a gun, or really wants to, but every now and then we get the itch to squeeze off a few rounds and teach those targets some respect. The targets were never in much danger. We caught a late lunch of barbecue, checked out the hardware store for new toys, hit the electronics store just for fun, and found ourselves at home by early evening. After a big day out, it was time to settle on the porch, have a few beers, make conversation, and eat the biggest plate of nachos we could construct. David had been holding his tongue for months, and that night his thoughts started leaking out. How is Ariel's mother doing these days? About the same as always. She seems cheerful enough when I speak with her, but Ariel tells me she's been depressed ever since her husband died. Doesn't she have a son? I met him. His name is George, isn't it? Yeah. He's a good guy. I don't see him as much as I'd like, but I think you'd like him. He's a stand-up guy, direct, no games, good sense of humor. He married a local girl up there and lives about an hour from Marie. Marie is Ariel's mother, right? Yeah. You two get along? God, yes. She's like a second mother to me. Her husband died about a year after Ariel and I got married, but the two of them welcomed me into the family like I'd always belonged with them. You know, I can't remember a single time the television was on when I was visiting. George Sr., Ariel's father, had his favorite chair situated perfectly for watching the TV, but he never once watched it when I was there. We'd sit around and talk, tell jokes, and just enjoy one another, and that TV stayed off the whole time. Now that's good people. I nodded and smiled. I miss him. The first 6 months after he died were hard for Ariel. She wasn't herself. Then her spirit lifted. She started dressing better and telling stories about some of the people at work. I guess that's about the same time she started going out some Fridays after work with the women from her office. David just sat there quietly, staring across the lawn behind the apartment. Do you see Marie much these days? Do I see Marie much? That question triggered something that had been bothering me for a while now. Actually, with the exception of Christmas, I haven't seen her for almost a year. Ariel goes up once a month and I speak with her on the phone occasionally, but she hasn't been the same. She seems to be on edge around me for some reason. Last Christmas we drove up for a few days and she seemed glad to see me, but every time I was alone with her, she would find something to do. When I offered to wash the dishes with her, she thanked me, handed me the towel, and walked away. I tried to help her prepare dinner, but she didn't want any help. To tell you the truth, I started thinking she was mad at me, but then she'd give me this big smile from across the room when the three of us were together and everything seemed alright. I thought about asking her, but I'm afraid I'll just hurt her feelings. Maybe she's not mad at you at all. Maybe she feels guilty. What does she have to feel guilty about? She's a lovely woman who wouldn't hurt a fly. I don't know. Maybe her loyalties are divided? Maybe she feels she's not being the mother-in-law to you that she needs to be? As I tried to process that comment, the phone rang. It was Ariel. Henry, what have you two been up to today? It was your basic check-in call. I told her about our day out and she told me about her day in with her mother. It lasted for maybe 5 minutes and ended with I love you. It wasn't the sort of thing people write movies about, but it was what married people do. Ariel says hello. Hello, Ariel. David was calling out to the ether since I'd already hung up. What's Ariel's cell phone number? I recited it from memory. Why do you ask? I got this neat AP for my phone. I can give it any cell phone number and it tells me where the phone is. Why the hell would you have something like that? Some of the guys at work were filing false reports, saying they visited vendors when they didn't, and that sort of thing. I thought rather than call every vendor and challenge every report, which would make the company look like some kind of amateur hour, I started pinging their phones. We figured out where the problems were and fixed it with as little muss and fuss as possible. That way, we didn't need to repair our relationship with the vendors. Cool. You management types have such weighty problems. That was about the most disrespect either of us ever showed each other. Didn't you tell me your mother-in-law lived in Vermont? Yeah. She's just outside Burlington. Why? According to this, Ariel's phone is in Maine. It's in Portland to be exact. That's got to be wrong. They're something like 200 miles apart. Your cell phone is XXXXXXXX? Yeah. According to this, you're sitting right in front of me. Let me see that. I checked the screen and there I was. Well, David exaggerated. It told me I was somewhere within about a few hundred yards of my house. Then I entered my wife's cell phone number and it said she was in Maine. I checked my brother, my sister, my parents, and my boss. Each was where they were supposed to be. I checked Ariel's cell number again and it still said Maine. I checked the contact list on my own phone, and my memory of her cell phone number wasn't wrong. What the hell is going on? Henry, do you ever call your mother-in-law while Ariel is up there? No. Usually, Ariel calls me. Is there anything you forgot to tell Ariel when she called? I saw where this was going. I never told her you said hello. I'd love to tell her hello. I called Marie's phone and she picked up on the third ring. Hello? How's my favorite mother-in-law? I was expecting the usual immediate, upbeat response, but Marie was strangely silent for what seemed like a very long time. Marie, are you there? Yes, of course, Henry. How are you, dear? I'm fine. I was just thinking that it's been a long time since we spoke, and I wanted to ask you how you're doing? Oh, I'm feeling well, dear. You know me, I've always been low maintenance. How are you? How is work? Are you getting around on that cast? When does it come off? She was uncharacteristically rattled. One of the things I always admired about Marie is that she really is low maintenance and virtually unflappable. We spoke for a few minutes and she seemed to pull it together, then I dropped the hammer. Listen, Marie, I hate to bother you like this, but I was missing my wife and I wanted to tell her something important. Could you put her on the phone for me? The silence on the other end was deafening. Marie, are you still there? Yes, dear. I'm sorry. Ariel stepped out to get some eggs for tomorrow's breakfast. I'm sure she'll be back soon. Her voice was quivering, and it didn't take a trained therapist to hear the tension in it. She was lying to me and Marie was not a practiced liar by any means. Well, please ask her to call me when she gets back. It doesn't matter what time it is. I'll be here. Of course, dear. I'm sure she'll call you soon. With that, we both said goodbye and I hung up. I turned to David. She lied to me. Does she do that often? She's never lied to me. I didn't think she even knew how to lie. It's not like her at all. A few minutes later the phone rang. It was Ariel. Hello, lover. Sorry I missed your call. That's okay. I was just missing you and I wanted to hear your voice. Ah, that's sweet. I miss you, too. The other reason I called you is to say that David insists he's taking us to dinner next weekend. How does that sound? Sounds like we need to go someplace expensive. I could hear her laughing. How the hell could she be laughing and passing off a lie at the same time? Listen, babe, I hate to bother her again, but there was something I needed to tell your mother. Could you put her on for me? Silence. Then, oh, Henry, she's gone off to bed. Tell me what it is, and I'll pass it along to her. It's only been 10 minutes since I called her. I'm sure she's still awake. Please, just take the phone to her and I'll make it quick. That was when Ariel made her next big mistake. She got pissy with me. Henry, I told you she's gone to bed and I'm not going to disturb her. Now just give me the message and I'll pass it along when she gets up. Now it was my turn to dish out some silence. Henry, are you still there? I really don't like that tone you're taking with me and I sure as hell don't deserve it. I'll tell her the next time I see her. Good night, Ariel. Sweetie, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I hung up on her. It wasn't a conscious act on my part. I was genuinely angry. It seemed my fears were confirmed, and she was dishing out piss and vinegar to cover her betrayal. Where does your AP place her cell now? Same place. It hasn't moved. It was all clear to me now. My wife was lying to me and her mother was covering for her. I racked my brain to think of a good reason for Ariel to lie and there was only one. Marie didn't have even that. Plus. The next few hours were tense in my apartment. I wanted to drink, but David cut me off. He said, "You need a clear head now and beer isn't going to give you that." He started making coffee and I realized later he had a plan. With 2 full travel mugs he entered the living room and announced, "Saddle up, Henry. The charger is pulling out." "What the hell are you talking about?" "Listen, Henry, right now you're mad as hell and full of doubt. Your heart refuses to believe what your head is telling it. You need to know. You need a resolution to your uncertainty. We're driving to Portland to confront her. Are you going, or are you staying?" Looking back, I suppose I was in shock by then. I sat there feeling conflicted and confused, not saying anything, until I felt the hammer fall. A wave of anger and determination passed through me. "I'm going." With a broken leg and crutches, I didn't move fast, but I was finally moving. The confused and broken man who just a few hours ago listened to his wife and his mother-in-law lie to him, the fearful man who worried that his wife was having an affair, became the man driving to Maine to confront his cheating wife and demand a divorce. It was dark, the best time to drive, and the miles passed with little to distract us. David drove and I stewed. Ariel was cheating on me. For a year she'd been going to Vermont to visit her mother. Had she been cheating on me the whole time? Who was this guy and how did she meet him? Did she meet him in Vermont? Did she even go to Vermont on her weekends? I tried to get a grip on my emotions and make a mental list of what I knew as opposed to what I ought. She said she was going to Vermont to visit her mother, but she was in Maine. She lied to me. Her mother lied to me. They were working together. She damn well wasn't at her mother's house no matter how hard they tried to pretend she was. All those nights out with the girls, those sharp outfits she wore to work, the gradual change in her demeanor, it all started to fall into place. It was a quiet 3.5-hour drive from Hartford to Portland, highway all the way. We left my place a little after midnight and stopped once at a 24-hour convenience store to unload and reload with coffee and chips. There was no traffic to slow us down and the open road made the driving easy. As we approached Portland, I pulled up the cell phone app on David's phone and zeroed in on Ariel's location. Portland is a very navigable town, and by 4:30 we found her car. It was sitting in the parking lot below a 3-story apartment building. David nodded, said, "Right," and pulled back onto the street. "Where the hell are you going? Do you want to ring all the doorbells looking for her, or wait for her to come out?" "Well, I don't know. Fuck, I've never done this before. And you'll never do it again. We're going to find a quick pit stop, unload and reload, get gas, and then we'll be ready to stake out her car." David was thinking ahead. I was an emotional basket case. Okay. I get it now. 20 minutes later we were back at her car pulling into a space that was out of the way but left her car clearly visible. David shut down the charger and we began to wait. It was 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning, the world was quiet, and my cheating wife was upstairs with some crapsack laughing at how easy it was to put one over on her husband while all I could do was sit and wait. We sat there for 5 long hours just waiting and watching. The sun came up, the air warmed, and we continued to sit there. It was nearly 10 a.m. when she came walking out of the building, arm in arm with her weekend bedmate. I instantly recognized him. I'd met him at a few of her office social functions. Isn't that her? Of course that's her. Pull up behind them and block them in so she can see me. David started the charger, pulled around the row of cars, stopped behind what I'm assuming was the crapsack's car, and turned off the charger's engine. The crapsack looked at me with more attitude than he could defend, and just as he was about to tell me to get out of his way, Ariel looked up and saw me sitting just 10 feet away. Her eyes went wild, she dropped her purse, and before she could scream, she fainted dead away. Her head hit the pavement hard and I didn't move a finger to help her. I just looked at that sack of crap and said, "Help her, asshole. She's yours now. Tell her not to come home. Ever." I waved for David to go, he started the charger's engine, and we pulled away into traffic. My wife, my life, was lying on the pavement behind me passed out and I just left her there with her fuck buddy. If he wants the pleasure, he can do the work that goes with it. She was no longer my problem. I'd cared for her when she was sick, held her when her father died, reassured her when work wasn't going well, took her dancing when she was bored and to dinner when she had the desire. I'd paid the bills, created savings, worked late, helped with the cooking, the cleaning, and the shopping, and generally done what was needed when you have a life with someone, and now none of that was my responsibility any longer. All that was his problem now. David drove a few miles and pulled into a parking lot. "You okay?" "Yeah." All decisions made. All doubts resolved. I know what I'm going to do now. Divorce? Damn right. I promised for better or worse, but if I'm the only one living in the marriage, then it isn't a marriage. I won't be lied to and I won't be cuckolded. David just nodded that he understood, fired up the Charger, and we headed south on I-95. Where are we going now? Boy, that was a good question. I knew where I wanted to go, but it was asking a lot. How do you feel about a day of driving? David just smiled and said, Vermont? Yeah, Vermont. South on I-95, west on NHRT4, then RT202 to Concord, south on I-93, west on I-89, and don't stop until you hit Burlington. How the fuck do you know that? I looked it up while we were staking out her car. I didn't see that. You were asleep. Shit, seriously? Relax. You were exhausted. Stress will do that. Sorry, man. Nothing to be sorry about. You're wrestling with every emotion in the book and I'm just a guy out for a drive. I knew better than that. This man, my brother, was a man of empathy. He cared about me and about every decent human being he ever met. As we drove south on I-95 and then headed west on NHRT4, I worked to put the pieces together. I replayed every discussion, every action, looking for something that was out of character. There were little things, but people are complicated, and I wrote them off at the time as the normal evolution of a marriage. I figured it was nothing more than a trusted wife struggling to deal with the pressures of a career and building a life for us both. Life and marriage aren't a perpetual honeymoon, but there were signs and I missed them. Somehow, David didn't. Replaying our discussions and his comments over the past year, I realized he had put the pieces together. You knew. How did you know? I didn't know. I just started wondering. What clued you in? I don't know. It was the little things. It wasn't the late nights at the office, or the Friday nights out with the girls, or the trips north to visit her mother, but all of it together, and then the way she seemed to stop making those little gestures started me wondering. What little gestures? The way she used to touch you on your hand or your arm whenever you were near, the little kisses, the smiles, and the need to hold your attention when others around you were talking. All those little things seemed to dry up just a year and a half after the wedding. Dude, I was jealous of you in a big way. I kept wondering, why can't I find a girl like Ariel? I used to love being around the two of you and telling myself, someday, this is what it'll be like. Then it wasn't. How did you see it when I didn't? Oh, you saw it. We talked about it often enough. You just didn't want to believe. You were a man who loved his wife, and the thought that she wasn't invested in the marriage the same way you were wasn't something you were willing to consider. I was a blind fool. You were a man in love. Some women look for love all their lives and never find it, while Ariel had it and threw it away. Believe me, as much as you hurt now, she's going to regret her actions more than you can imagine. You were a good husband, Henry. I know it sounds trite, but you came home every night, you didn't blow your paycheck at the bar, and you didn't cheat. You took care of your wife, saved for the future, listened to her thoughts, and held her when she cried. That may not sound like much, but in the long run it's everything. So where did I go wrong? You didn't. She did. Why? I don't know. Maybe it was her father's death. Maybe the need to grow up and handle all the responsibilities of marriage and a career were too much for her. Maybe it was the thought of starting a family someday that scared her. Maybe she just met up with a smooth-talking predator who got in her head and twisted her thinking into knots. You may never know. Hell, she may not even know. We drove on in silence for a long time after that. It's 4.5 hours from Portland to Burlington, and on any other day I would have enjoyed the view. On that day it was just miles and hours passing by as I prepared to confront the woman who was as much a mother to me as the woman who gave me life. I would ask her why she had betrayed me so badly. What did I do to deserve her lies and deception? She owed me that much. As we drove, it finally occurred to me that this woman had the answers to many of my questions, but would she tell me? Plus. 45 minutes south of Portland, we were approaching the New Hampshire border. I should have kicked his ass. David's eyes never left the road. He just started to laugh. Sure. I can see that. You throw open the car door, reach around behind you and push the seat back down, wiggle backwards until you can swing your bum leg out of the car, then wiggle forward until you're positioned, lean out the door, put both arms on the door frame, lift yourself out of the car, reach back to get your crutches, hobble over to the crap sack, get in his face and say, "I'm going to kick your ass." Okay, he had a point. I still should have kicked his ass. You will, later, after your leg is healed and you have your strength back. We'll drive back up and find him. Maybe we'll bring a couple of friends. There's no point in being gentleman about it. He was no gentleman when he screwed your wife behind your back. We'll just find him, beat the crap out of him, and drive home. Roger that. We continued riding quietly, me with my thoughts and David focusing on the road. As we approached the Connecticut River that marked the boundary between New Hampshire and Vermont, David said, "You hungry?" No. Well, I am. With that, he took the ramp off the highway and we found a family-style pub where we got 2 big cheeseburgers. When I ordered a beer, David interjected and told the waitress he'll have an iced tea. I looked at him like he was nuts. Don't you think I've earned a beer? You'll need your wits when we get there. And he turned to the waitress and repeated, he'll have an iced tea and so will I. I looked at the waitress and shrugged. We spent our lunch discussing the questions I had for Marie. I wanted to know why and how long, and I figured she probably knew at least one of those answers to some degree. Then most of all, I wanted to know how she could lie to me for so long. It's no exaggeration that Marie was like a second mother to me. When your wife betrays you, it's devastating, but you know it can happen. Marriage vows are a promise not to betray, but it's no guarantee. Mothers are supposed to be something better than that. Mothers are supposed to love and stand by you no matter what, and always be true. That's when David gave me the second worst news of the day. Maybe that's what happened? What do you mean? Maybe she had to stand by Ariel even though she was ashamed of what her daughter was doing. It was at that moment that I realized Marie could never choose me over her own daughter. It didn't ease the pain, but it told me what to expect when we got to her house. There was no longer any question. I had lost a wife and a mother in the same day. It was 4 p.m. when we pulled into the driveway of Marie's home. Nobody came to the door as we pulled up, so maybe Ariel hadn't called, and Marie wasn't expecting us. Should I stay here? Maybe you should talk with her alone? You've been with me through all of it. You're up to your neck in this now, so you might as well walk the last mile with me. David helped me out of the car and then we walked to the door and rang the bell. It wasn't Marie who answered. It was George Jr. He stepped out and onto the porch, and then he closed the door behind him. Henry, am I ever glad to see you? Your wife called Mom a couple hours ago and she's been crying ever since. She's a basket case, Henry. I haven't seen her like this since Dad died, and even then, she held it together better than she is now. Yeah, well, Ariel was found out and your mother is a part of it. Found out? What are you talking about? Ariel has been cheating on me and Mom was covering for her. George's back straightened and he looked me in the eye. Bullshit. It's true. Mom lied to me last night and claimed Ariel was here all weekend. Did you see her? I only came over to take Mom out to brunch, but Ariel wasn't here when I arrived. That's because she's been on the coast in Portland all weekend. She was staying with a guy she used to work with down in Connecticut. Both Ariel and Mom lied to me repeatedly and I'm here to get some answers. George looked back toward the door. She's in bad shape, Henry. I don't think. I won't be rough on her, but she owes me some answers. George hesitated and then repeated himself. Okay, but she's in bad shape right now, Henry. You have to go easy on her. I'll do my best. As I stepped toward the door, David spoke up. I think I'll stay here. This is a family matter now. Reluctantly, I agreed. As I stepped into the house where I had felt so much at home, it struck me that I would never enter this house again. Ariel and I were through, Marie and I were through, and George wouldn't like what I was about to say to his mother. In just one day I'd lost half my family and my life was changed forever. As I stepped through the door, I heard Marie sobbing, but when she saw me, she wailed out loud as the pain and guilt of her own betrayal hit home. I walked toward her as she held her face in her hands. Standing before her, I could see her pain and all the questions I wanted her to answer melted away with her tacit admission of guilt. I no longer cared about the answers and it was impossible for me to hurt her more deeply than she already hurt. I took a breath and exhaled. Goodbye, Marie. That was all I said. I turned and left the house as I heard Marie screaming in pain. I guess maybe I had been a son to her after all. I'd lost my second mother, but she had lost her second son and now we both knew the other's pain all too well. I left the house and David said, "That was fast." I just nodded to David and said, "Let's go." 2 minutes later we had pulled out and were driving south to Connecticut. We rode in silence for a time and as the fog in my brain began to lift, I thought about where I might be if it were not for my brother, David. I thought back to those early days in 4th grade and then going through grade school and high school, and finally our reconnection after college and the years since. Where would I be today if my brother had not transferred into my school that year and sat behind me in class? Who would I be without a brother to share the journey with? Who else would have my back through it all? I looked over at David as we drove the highway back to Burlington. Thanks, man. I don't know where I'd be right now without you. Without taking his eyes off the road, he said simply, "What's a brother for?" After a pause he added, "You know, this isn't over by a long shot." I know. It isn't over, but the marriage is. We drove on in silence, each with our own thoughts. I would need to find a lawyer. There would be accusations, denials, and tears. We were dinks, dual income, no kids, and young, and we didn't have much in the way of property or investments. We rented and didn't own. The division of property would be easy. We'd both been quiet for about an hour when David broke the silence. "What ya thinkin'?" "Whether I'll need to see her again, who gets what, the usual crap." "So who gets custody of me?" I turned to see my friend, still looking at the road and beaming like the Cheshire Cat. "Me, I guess." "She's going to suffer enough." Anyone seeing us driving down the highway, laughing like two fools, would think we were just two old friends out and about on a Sunday afternoon, telling jokes and throwing insults. He once told me he was my friend, but he was much more than that. God only knows where I would be without my brother. Epilogue. Needless to say, the marriage didn't end that easily or that quietly. Ariel wasn't home when we got there. In fact, she took the next week off and finally did spend that time with her mother. I got the obligatory phone calls and text messages. I read them all and learned nothing. She came back and asked for forgiveness, but I had none to give. Her betrayal wasn't a one-time drunken mistake. It was a systematic and well-planned program of betrayal and deceit that had begun while Crapsack was working in Hartford. She had her excuses, but I wasn't accepting any of them. She even tried that old chestnut, "I didn't take anything away from you." Bullshit. She eventually moved out. The judge ordered counseling and I went, I participated, and it didn't do anything to change my mind. 9 months after catching her, the divorce was final, and she transferred to Portland. Doubling down on a bad decision, she married the guy. Her second marriage lasted less than 2 years. He was an unrepentant cheat, and she was the only one that didn't see it coming. David and I never did make that drive back north to get that much-needed closure. By the time my leg was healed, and I had my strength back, Crapsack no longer seemed worth the effort or the risk. I wasn't going to do time for that worthless excuse for a human being. Marie calls from time to time and I make the effort to be civil with her. Every call includes an apology and I've taken to saying simply, "I understand, Marie." Maybe someday I'll be able to say honestly that I forgive her, but that day hasn't come yet. The love I once felt for my second mother isn't there like it once was, but I've learned to appreciate that Ariel put her in an impossible position. Marie's lies were intended to save my marriage with the hope that Ariel would come to her senses, but in the end, it was a failed deception to reach an unachievable hope. She did do me one small favor, but I suspect it was more for herself than for me. Marie never allowed Ariel to bring that crap sack into her home and she never slept in theirs. Even after the marriage, she treated him as if he were still just the interloper in my marriage, and she wanted nothing to do with him. You can say it was too little too late and you'd be right, but I know it took a lot for her to do that. It made her daughter a virtual exile within her own family and it may have contributed to the death of her second marriage. As for me, life goes on. It's been almost 2 years since that fateful day and I'm starting to think I should dip my toe in the dating pool. That may sound like a long time to some, but change comes slowly and with great effort for me. Trust comes even more slowly now. David still drops by regularly, but now I'm free to go to his place just as easily. He's dating a lovely girl with an infectious laugh. She knows my story and has told me in no uncertain terms what she thinks of cheats. The table is turned now, and I find myself jealous of my friend and thinking, someday, this is what it'll be like. They say that divorce is like a death in the family. They're wrong. Divorce is like half the family dies and the other half limps along as best they can. Plus. Some will say that Henry never got the revenge that he deserved. Liars and cheats create their own suffering and the fist seldom inflicts the lasting pain that the heart and mind endure. The heart knows pain because the love that was freely given is withdrawn and the brain knows that they have only themselves to blame. As for the kind of men that seduce other men's wives, I can only say that karma is a bitch. They suffer every day in 100 different ways they will never understand because their own values deny them the greatest experiences that life has to offer until one day they cross the wrong man with less to lose. Let Henry and David get on with their lives without the need to answer for those actions that feel so good for a moment, but never provide lasting satisfaction.